Recently, a New York landlord decided to set his own property on fire because his tenants stopped paying rent and refused to move out, pointing out the fact that landlords in New York, particularly landlords of rent controlled buildings, they need relief. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have a couple of interesting articles for you today, and I'm breaking one of my cardinal rules, and I'm covering a story that is pretty negative for a landlord. I don't cover the negative landlord stories, right? But I thought I would cover this one because there was a landlord up in New York who he felt so, basically helpless that he decided to set his own building on fire. Now, why would a landlord feel that this was their only way to get a tenant up out of the property? Well, because the laws, rules, and regulations treat the tenants more like they own the property than you do. Okay, so you feel like, hey, you can't evict people who aren't paying you rent. They're costing you tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes, and they're just taking advantage of the situation. Now, I'm not condoning what this guy did. This guy, he is absolutely 100% in the wrong. What I am saying is that I understand how he feels. I understand why he's so frustrated. And there are literally thousands of landlords just like him in places like New York who feel like they can't do anything. They are stuck in a system that is working against them. So, what I am trying to say is that, landlords, we need relief. We need help. We need people to see things from our perspective, that we are just trying to operate our business and we're just being taken advantage of by tenants who don't want to pay their bills and people who are scammers. Okay. And that's why I'm bringing you these articles today. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. Now, I've talked and I've asked, before, what or would you be willing to do in order to get rid of a tenant who isn't paying? And I've had people in the comment section, kind of anonymously be like, hey, I'll cut their power, I'll do X, Y, Z, right? And while I always say to follow the law, I completely understand why these landlords are feeling so frustrated. So, what would you be willing to do if you had a tenant who basically was scamming you and just wanted to take advantage of you, and the city and the local government gave you absolutely no way to be able to get rid of this tenant? Okay. I mean, would you be willing to break the law? Would you go out of your way to, try to go after this tenant? What would you do? My suggestion, follow the law, but I'm just kind of curious what everyone else thinks. So anyway, let's get into this first article. This article is coming from WFTV.com, and it says, landlord accused of setting home ablaze when delinquent tenants refused to move. Yeah. The frustration you must have to set your own property on fire, that's insane. Okay. And, maybe he had a true mental breakdown. And we've been hearing a lot about people who've been having mental breakdowns lately. There's a big mental health crisis going on throughout the entire country right now. So, anyway, let's get into this article. A landlord in New York City is accused of setting fire to a residence after his tenants had not paid their rent and had refused to move out, authorities said. Rafiqel Islam is facing 8 counts of attempted murder, assault, and arson, WPIX TV reported. According to the New York Fire Department, Islam is accused of setting fire at a residence on September 26th, located at 212 Fort Bell Street in the Cypress Hills section of Brooklyn, according to WCBS TV. Fire officials said that Islam allegedly set fire to an indoor staircase at the residence, WPIX reported. The tenants lived on the second floor of the building, according to the television station. There were 2 adults and 6 children inside the residence, WCBS reported. No matter how bad your tenants treat you, keep in mind there are innocent children in there. Those children have nothing to do with the fact that their parents aren't paying the rent. Now, you know, this guy, he deserves to go to prison. He's a scumbag. I would never do anything to harm children. Okay, and I wouldn't harm the adults either. But the fact that there were children up in there and they could have passed away due to this dude's actions. I mean, he gets what he deserves. And this is a garbage landlord. He gives us all a bad name. And I just had to bring this topic up though, because it, it shows that there is a bigger message here. Okay. He probably felt so frustrated with New York state laws that make it very difficult to evict tenants, very hard to collect rent, that he felt this was his only course of action. Of course, it wasn't, right? But if you feel that way and you get frustrated enough, then this is the result. This is the result. This is why I tell people, if you are a small landlord in particular and you have the choice, I wouldn't invest there. I wouldn't, because the government feels like you are the part of the problem, and I don't want to be treated like that. And I don't think anybody should be treated like that. But anyway, like I was saying, landlords, they need relief. And that kind of goes into the second article I'm about to cover right now. And this one's coming from Forbes, and it says, "The struggle, relief needed for landlords of New York City rent regulated housing." And, obviously all the landlords in New York need relief right now, but the landlords of rent control housing are really, really suffering because, they can't keep pace with inflation. They are just basically stuck in a position where, hey, they can't set their own rents. The city rent guidelines board is setting rents for them and they're screwed over. So, anyway, let's get into this article. Over the last 4 years, landlords of rent stabilized buildings in New York City have faced a number of challenges: onerous new regulations, an eviction moratorium, rent arrears, and increased expenses for insurance premiums, taxes, and debt. In response, industry leaders have stepped up to advocate for owners by seeking relief in the Supreme Court, New York State Capitol, and City Hall. Supreme Court challenge to rent stabilization. The Community Housing Improvement Program and the Rent Stabilization Association petitioned the Supreme Court last May to examine the constitutionality of rent stabilization after New York State lawmakers passed the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act of 2019, which introduced new provisions governing the city's 1 million regulated units. And the provisions that they passed, and the one that is the absolute worst, is the one that makes it darn near impossible to increase rents to cover the cost of doing maintenance and upgrades to a unit. So after a tenant leaves a unit, if you sink $100,000 into getting that unit up to snuff, right? Getting it repaired and all that, well, you won't be able to increase your rent in order to cover the expenses that you incurred. Okay, so if I have to go in there and do thousands of dollars worth of work and I'm unable to recover the money that I spent, well, it's easier for me just to keep my property empty. And that is a huge problem because we're now seeing tens of thousands of empty units just sitting there. And they're like, oh, well, you should be forced to rent these out. And I'm like, no, we did the math. We did the math. We're the ones who have to spend the money. We're the ones who own these properties, and we have the right to keep them empty as long as we want. Now, of course, they're trying to change that. They're trying to pass laws because that's what they think. They think the solution to everything is passing more laws to force people to rent their units out. Yeah, whatever. That's idiotic. The broad-based petition was based on the Takings Clause of the Fifth Amendment, providing that no private property can be taken for public use without just compensation. Previous legal challenges to HSTPA failed in the lower courts, leading the organizations to turn to the Supreme Court, which announced on October 2nd that it would not hear the petition. Yeah, and I covered that story. Basically, landlords lost, okay? And, regardless of my personal opinions, I have to respect the decision of the Supreme Court in deciding not to hear the case. It kind of sucks. I know they get petitioned to hear, just hundreds or even thousands of cases every year, and they have to be, very picky on what they choose because they just don't have enough time to be able to hear everything. But man, it seems like a case like this would have had impacts throughout the entire country and could have changed everything for landlords, for tenants, for states. It would have made a huge difference. I mean, on the level of You know, basically them getting rid of the eviction moratoriums. They would have been on that same level. Two other more narrowly focused petitions for cert challenging rent stabilization are currently pending before the Supreme Court. The unintended consequences of vacancy control make New York City an outlier. Moving forward, CHIP, which represents 4,000 owners of stabilized properties, plans to concentrate on advocacy and educating lawmakers about the unintended consequences of their housing legislation and policies, CHIP Executive Director Jay Martin said in an interview. While lawmakers may have passed the HSTPA with good intentions and a desire to weed out a small percentage of bad actors, the legislation has actually negatively impacted or affected renters. For example, HSTPA regulations removed incentives for owners to renovate rent stabilized apartments vacated by long term tenants, which has resulted in more than 30,000 units remaining vacant. Yeah, and that's what I just talked about a moment ago. Landlords keeping their properties vacant because they can't make enough money to be able to cover the expense of doing the rehab on them. Okay. Very, very bad negative consequences. Now, where I disagree with this landlord group is that I don't think that trying to educate these lawmakers is going to do anything. The lawmakers will not, they won't respond to us. They won't. The only thing they care about is getting votes. And if that means lying to people, if that means misleading people, leaving out important information, or just ignoring important information, so be it. That's what they care about, is getting reelected, not about actually doing what's going to help people. Because the perception of the tenants is that, hey, this is a good thing. This will keep our rents low forever, and we'll be happy and we'll live in la la land, whatever. Okay, it's a complete lie. It's a joke. And the end result of this is a whole bunch of tenants living in dilapidated properties, a lot less rental units available on the market, and just basically a real estate market where people can't afford to live. They can't find housing that they can afford. It's awful. It's absolutely awful. And, you know, it leads to the sort of frustration, where, like I was talking about in the first story, where you have landlords who are losing their properties, their finances are in ruins, and these tenants are just laughing at them. Okay, well, I understand the frustration that landlord went through. I don't agree with it, but I understand, and these sort of laws are the reason why. So, what I would do if I was this landlord group, continue to fight against these laws, okay? This is an unconstitutional taking, whether the Supreme Court decided to hear the case or not. Okay, we need more lawsuits. We need people to sue. That's the only way. And it's going to cost money. That's the bad part. It's going to cost a lot of money. But if we, as landlords, pool our resources together, we can fight this sort of thing. And eventually, it will get heard by the Supreme Court, who hopefully will throw this garbage out.